I wonder as well, Jackie, if you could speak a bit about your research on urban masculinities and young
Yeah,
men on the street and their
sure.
experiences.
Sure. I thought that might be where the gender question was coming from. So yeah, happily. Um, so in the a study I did a few years ago, I was working with young people in Ottawa. The project was actually what we call a participatory action research design, which was meant to engage the people who are participating in the research in a process of co-design. Participatory research can take a lot of different forms. So the way we did it, myself and my research assistants, we were accessing a youth drop-in shelter, um, and we were interacting with young people and doing these sort of interactive activities to get their views on things. And then we invited them to participate in different parts of the project, and from there kind of built up the project, which ended up actually being short films. Now, that was the core project, but alongside that, we were hanging out with and having interviews and doing walking conversations with young people. And so I was getting to know them. And one of the things that was coming up was in terms of my lens as a researcher that I was noticing, it wasn't something young people were commenting on, but I was noticing the ways in which gender was manifesting in their how they moved through the space, how they talked about the space, how they interacted with one another. And in particular, this was a drop-in space. We had more young men than women, as well as gender non-binary and trans participants. But primarily male-identifying youth who were accessing the space and thus participating in the research and taking us on the walking tours. And I was just really interested in how they moved through the space, and in particular, the walking interviews, which we did in downtown Ottawa, where basically they just kind of walked us around and talked about the places that they were seeing. And we did our best to audio record as they were walking with all the background noise. And and yeah, and just from that, starting to get a sense of just from how they describe the space, the ways in which masculinity would shape their experiences. And so, to be a bit more concrete, an example that one of the young men gave us, we were walking past the courthouse, and we'd already done. No, that's not true. This happened later. In the films that we did, the courthouse and the young people's experiences with policing was a really prominent theme and became one of the films. So in this walking interview, which was earlier, one of the young men was pointing out the courthouse and saying how he'd been in and out because he'd get charged, and lots and lots of interactions with the police for street-involved young people, many of them very negative. And this young man was talking about how he approached the courthouse. He had to go in. He had a court date, and he walked in. And I've been in that courthouse, and I think a lot of them are the same. They're very imposing, formal spaces with security and people in uniforms, and it is not a welcoming space. And he walks in. He tells me. And the guy who confronts him, probably a security guard, tells him to take off his hat, and presumably he was wearing a baseball cap, and he didn't want to take off his hat. And he doesn't explain why he didn't want to take off his hat to me, but I'm guessing his hair is probably a mess, or he hadn't had a shower in several days, or whatever, or maybe he was just reacting to the sort of arbitrary authority of take off your hat. And that, for young women walking into that space, that would not be the kind of interaction they would have. A young woman probably would not, even if she was wearing a hat, would probably not be asked to remove it. Um, that interaction was very much about masculinity and what is considered an appropriate performance of middle class masculinity in that space, which is a very, middle and upper middle class space of extreme authority, state authority, right? It's a courthouse. It's the place where the laws are enacted. Um, so yeah, so that's you just like a quick example of the kinds of insights that we were sort of exposed to, I guess, by having these walking interviews where otherwise that might not have come up. I wouldn't have thought to ask a young person about whether they had to remove their hat when they walked into a courthouse. It came up spontaneously, and things like that that I learned about and was observing, and then put together into an article about young men navigating the streets of Ottawa.